Good evening. I welcome you to Strange Nexus, your portal to the realms of the strange, spooky, and unexplained. On tonight's episode, we share a Halloween treat. We hear the tale of a man on his seemingly ordinary flight home on Halloween night, as he encounters a malevolent entity with a jack-o'-lantern head that turns the flight into a nightmarish ordeal.
I stared out of the airplane window, my breath forming misty patches against the glass. The night was pitch black, the only lights visible being the distant stars and the tiny scattered ones on the ground far below. It was Halloween night, and I was on my way back home after a long business trip. I should have been excited to reunite with my family, especially my 2 young children who were eagerly waiting for me to return, bearing Halloween candy. However, something about this flight was making me uneasy, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I'm a frequent traveler, so I've experienced all kinds of flights, from turbulence to engine trouble. But this one felt different. The unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach was like a stone that refused to budge. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I tried to reassure myself that it was just the combination of exhaustion and the eerie atmosphere of Halloween. The flight had been uneventful so far, and my fellow passengers seemed just as tired and restless as I was. The cabin lights were dimmed to create a calming ambience, and most of the passengers were either dozing off or engrossed in their in-flight entertainment. I decided to watch a movie to take my mind off the unease, selecting a light-hearted comedy in the hopes of brightening my mood. As the movie played on the tiny screen in front of me, the cabin suddenly plunged into darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I heard gasps and startled exclamations from the passengers around me. An announcement from the captain came over the intercom, explaining that there had been a minor electrical issue, but the backup systems were in place, and there was nothing to worry about. The cabin lights flickered back on, and I could see the relief on the faces of my fellow travelers. However, my unease only deepened when I looked out the window. The plane was surrounded by an eerie mist, thick and swirling, like a scene from a horror movie. It was as if we were flying through a cloud of shadow and dread, and my heart raced in my chest. Just as I began to calm myself down and return to the movie, the cabin lights flickered again, and this time they went out completely. A collective groan of frustration swept through the passengers. I tried to find my way to the aisle, using my phone as a flashlight, but it seemed that the entire plane had lost power. The eerie mist outside the window was the only source of faint illumination. As the seconds ticked by in darkness, panic started to grip the passengers. Whispers of concern turned into full-blown conversations about what might be happening. Flight attendants tried to reassure us, but their voices quivered with anxiety. It was evident that even they had no idea what was going on. I could feel the sweat on my brow as the oppressive darkness continued. Suddenly, a new source of light appeared. The overhead monitors, which had been off, all came to life at once. The screens emitted a pale, flickering glow, revealing a horrifying sight. The image that filled the screens was a grotesque, grinning jack-o'-lantern with eyes that glowed with malevolence. The cabin filled with terrified screams, and I could hear people praying and sobbing. The jack-o'-lantern on the screens began to speak, its voice a low, raspy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome, my passengers," it hissed. "I have taken control of your vessel, and you are now in my domain. There is no escape." The passengers were paralyzed with fear, their faces illuminated by the sinister glow from the screens. The jack-o'-lantern continued. "Tonight, on this Halloween flight, I shall show you your darkest fears, your deepest regrets, and your most gruesome fates. There is no escape from the truth, for I am the harbinger of your nightmares." I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. It had to be some sort of twisted prank, right? My rational mind desperately sought an explanation, but the fear in the air was palpable, and the eerie mist outside the window only added to the surreal horror of the situation. The screens flickered, and images of passengers' faces appeared on them. As they did, the passengers themselves began to change. I watched in horror as people aged rapidly, their skin wrinkling and their hair turning grey. Some were engulfed in flames, while others were submerged in dark waters, gasping for air. It was as if the screens were showing us the most terrifying possibilities of our futures. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screens, even as my own image appeared. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw myself in a hospital bed, frail and weak. The room was filled with mournful faces, and I realized with dread that I was on my deathbed. Tears welled up in my eyes as the image faded, and the jack-o'-lantern on the screens cackled with glee. The torment continued, with each passenger subjected to their own nightmarish visions. I watched as a young mother was separated from her children, who cried out for her as they were taken away by a shadowy figure. Another passenger saw themselves committing unspeakable acts of violence. It was a relentless barrage of horror, and I couldn't escape it. As the visions continued, the jack-o'-lantern's voice grew more malicious. "You see, my passengers, the truth of your existence, the darkness that lurks within your souls. You are all prisoners of your own fears, your own sins, and your own destiny." I was consumed by a sense of dread, my mind racing to comprehend the impossible. The passengers around me were weeping, screaming, and begging for it all to stop. But there was no escape from the screens that showed our torment. It was as though we were being forced to confront our worst nightmares, and there was no way out. The cabin was filled with the stench of fear, and the eerie mist outside seemed to seep into the plane, making the air dense and suffocating. I could feel the grip of panic tightening around me, and I knew I had to do something. I reached for the nearest emergency exit and pulled it open, causing a rush of freezing cold air to flood the cabin. The mist outside the plane began to pour in, swirling and coiling like a living entity. To my shock, however, the cabin pressure remained stable and I was not being sucked into the void of the night sky. I knew that jumping from the plane was a desperate and dangerous move, but it was the only chance of escaping the nightmare. I climbed out onto the wing, the cold wind stinging my face, and I looked back at the other passengers who were still trapped inside. I screamed at them to follow me, to escape from the torment, but their eyes were fixed on the screens, and they couldn't tear themselves away. My mind was still in torment over the visions I witnessed, and I would do anything to get away from the plane. In a leap of faith and/or madness, I jumped from the wing and plummeted through the thick mist. The world around me twisted and turned as I fell, and the eerie glow of the screens faded into the distance. I didn't know where I was going or what awaited me, but I couldn't bear to face that horrific vision of my own death. As I continued to fall, the mist began to clear, and I found myself in a desolate, nightmarish landscape. The ground was covered in gnarled trees with twisted branches, and the sky above was a blood-red hue. I realized with a sinking feeling that I had escaped the plane, and somehow landed with a soft thud in a place that was even more nightmarish. The jack-o'-lantern entity from the plane appeared before me, its grin even wider and more malevolent. "You cannot escape your fate," it hissed. "This is your punishment for attempting to flee." I stumbled through the grotesque forest, my heart pounding and my mind in turmoil. I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. The jack-o'-lantern followed me, taunting and tormenting me with visions of my own fears and regrets. As the nightmarish journey continued, I came across other passengers who had also escaped the plane. They were lost and terrified, just like me. We banded together, hoping that there was safety in numbers. But the relentless horrors of this dark realm continued to haunt us. It became clear that the jack-o'-lantern entity was not bound by the laws of our world. It could manipulate time and space, subjecting us to an unending cycle of terror. We witnessed each other's darkest fears and regrets, and it tore at our sanity. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, but time had no meaning in this nightmarish realm. The jack-o'-lantern's malevolent laughter echoed through the twisted trees, a constant reminder of our tormentor's presence. We grew weaker with each passing day, our spirits broken, and our hope extinguished. It was as if the entity fed on our fear and despair, growing stronger with each torment it inflicted upon us. We were trapped in a never-ending Halloween nightmare, with no way to escape. One by one, the other passengers succumbed to the horrors of the realm, their minds shattered beyond repair. I was left alone, the last survivor, and the jack-o'-lantern entity seemed to take particular pleasure in tormenting me. I had lost track of how long I'd been in this nightmarish world, but it felt like an eternity. I'd become a hollow shell of my former self, haunted by the visions of my own fears and regrets. The entity showed me a future where I was forever trapped in this nightmare, a fate worse than death. But then, something changed. A glimmer of hope appeared in the darkness. I stumbled upon a hidden path in the forest, one that seemed to lead away from the malevolent entity's grasp. With every step, the air grew clearer, and the nightmarish landscape faded away. I emerged from the twisted forest into a world that was familiar, yet different. It was Halloween night, and I was standing in the midst of a suburban neighborhood. The streets were filled with children in colorful costumes, laughing and trick-or-treating. The houses were adorned with jack-o'-lanterns and decorations, and the atmosphere was one of joy and celebration. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was as if I had returned to the real world, but the memories of the nightmare were still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the jack-o'-lantern entity was still lurking somewhere, waiting to pull me back into its clutches. As I made my way through the neighborhood, I came across a familiar house. It was my own home, and I could see the warm glow of lights from the windows. My heart raced with hope and fear as I approached the front door. I hesitated for a moment, the memories of the nightmare still haunting me, but I couldn't stay away any longer. I opened the door and stepped inside, and there, in the warmth and light of my own home, I was reunited with my family. My wife and children were there, safe and sound, and they greeted me with tears of joy. It was a moment of pure happiness and relief, a stark contrast to the nightmare I had endured. I held my family close, grateful for their presence and the normalcy of our home. But as I looked out the window at the Halloween festivities in the neighborhood, a chilling thought lingered in the back of my mind. The jack-o'-lantern entity had promised that there was no escape from our fate. Had I truly found my way back to reality? Or was this just another illusion, another layer of the nightmare? The Halloween night outside continued with its cheerful revelry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the malevolent entity was still out there, waiting to reclaim me. The horror of that fateful flight and the nightmarish realm it had led me to would forever haunt my thoughts, a dark and twisted memory that would never fade. Halloween had taken on a whole new meaning for me, a night of terror and torment that I could never forget.
This reality never ceases to amaze me. What a tale. Now click subscribe and like this video for more Strange Nexus.